Hi, everyone. I am Lou Cysewski, and we are talking trash. Seth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am Seth Cysewski, and I'm also joining Talking Trash right now.
For anyone who doesn't know, Seth is my husband and co-founder of Coolperx. We provide businesses with, I would say, data-backed procurement for sustainable, ethical brand merchandise that they can put their logos on and distribute with the freedom of knowing that these products are upholding the values that they want to uphold. So that's a little bit about Coolperx. Today we are talking about microplastics found in the bloodstream. Have you heard this? Researchers found microplastics in blood.
Yeah, that's it's it's kind of the natural progression of where we've been heading. I guess it's like anywhere where you decide to test for it, you find it, and this is it's really a big warning sign, and it's very problematic, or it embodies a much larger plastic problem. Um, yeah, I've heard it. It's bad, not good.
Yeah. So the researchers, so I found this on the Smithsonian website, and the research body that actually found the plastics was Environmental Institute. And they tested 22 people, which is typically a very small N, a very small sample group. However, they were just looking for presence versus not presence of these microplastics. And 17 out of 22 of um, the people that they drew blood from had nanoplastics, had microplastics of a size greater than 700 nanometers, nano nm. Do you know about this? Very tiny pieces of plastic.
I do not. I do know that plastic breaks down quite a bit, and the studies I've read previously have always used the metric that Americans and probably most people consume about one plastic or credit card's worth of plastic each week, just through osmosis of eating and drinking water or whatever else, and so um, it's kind of worrying that it's not leaving.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's significant and it's terrifying. I don't think it's a warning so much as I think it's um, a sign that we're here. We're at this really bad point. And if we're not doing something to not only stop doing what we're doing, but reverse what we're doing, immediately we're going to end up in much worse situations. The implications of the nanoparticles found in human blood, we still don't even know what that's doing to generations of humans that are born now and in the near future, as this is going on. So it's really disturbing news. And I think, one of the things that we talk about constantly are the what to do about plastic, because a majority of plastic isn't recyclable, but there are new things coming out: the compostable plastics, the compostable machines, the home composting. I'd like to spend a minute or two talking about that, because it's something that people really are thinking about.
Yeah, I think we should definitely do that. I think back really quickly, just to circle back on the danger or the imminent threat that these play, at least to us as a species, is that, I mean, you can start looking at what they call a cancer alley, and there's a bunch of areas that are plastic producers using petrochemicals to create plastic, and the way plastics are put together, creating these polymers, they eventually break down. And so, of course, the stuff's going to end up in our bloodstream. But if you look at Cancer Alley, it's called that for a reason. So anywhere near the production of these plants where their byproducts are leaking out, people are dying much earlier, and they're ending up with really terrible health uh, afflictions. And so, yeah, I mean, again, like, we don't know what it does in our bloodstream, but we can look at the supply chain and how it came to be, and we can
Mhm.
look at all of that, and get an idea that it's probably not good once it's all said and done.
Yeah, we've been warned by years. Movies like Aaron Brockovich came out in the 90s, just bringing this to the forefront of our awareness so that, you know, we know that people living near factories and near these extraction points even are getting cancers and getting medical afflictions at a very high rate. And somehow us humans haven't chosen to do anything about it yet. We haven't actually freaked out and stopped doing what we're doing, right? I mean, like you hear about people who are still smoking despite a label on the package of the cigarette box that warns you that you will get cancer from smoking. However, when they get these test results that say, here's your bad news, your wake up call, a lot of times they will make those changes. What is it about us humans that that we haven't really taken any action or done anything?
Well, the first thing I hear you say there with the smoking, I think it's certainly applicable in one aspect. Being an analogy for dangerous things that we just didn't know better originally, and then we come to find out later that it's very, very dangerous. But the difference for me is that I'm not choosing. Like, I could choose to smoke, but I'm not choosing to put nano, plastics in my bloodstream. Like, this is not an option for me to avoid it, based on everyone else's action and really lack of regulation.
Yeah, so that brings up another point. Like I didn't know about Prop 65, California state legislature that states that products must, I actually have something that has a Prop 65 warning on it. That warning, just like a pack of cigarettes, here it is. This warning, cancer, Prop 65 warnings.ca.gov. I didn't understand the implications of Prop 65 until just recently. How is it that only people in California get to know what causes cancer?
I mean, first of all, California is generally leading the way when it comes to most environmental and health-based and regulation in general. And so, it's really a proving ground for most places. I think, though, we're kind of zooming in a little bit, and this is fine. We can go into it. But if we really zoom out, we got to start with what is plastic and where is it useful, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's being used for so many different purposes in which it's just not needed, right? So for me, it's the irresponsible use of plastic that's not needed. I mean, there's amazing medical breakthroughs that just couldn't happen without plastic, and I don't want to like use their talking points. But then you start, I mean, if I have to get see another styrofoam cup or plastic cup that's just going to get tossed away, I mean, this is just irresponsible. There's absolutely no reason for this to happen. There's definitely, I think, a limit to convenience, where we start trading off convenience for safety. And I would argue a lot of these cases, you're not even really getting convenience. You're saving, um, you're saving a little bit of money up front, and then you're passing it on to the consumer, and that's, I feel like, the bigger problem here.
Yeah, tell me more about that, passing it on to the consumer. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, because companies are able to buy this stuff so cheap, and what they're really passing on is, well, a few things, but well, waste, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this could be byproduct, monomers, polymer, like waste, which could be toxic, and what we're talking about here. So that could be one things they're passing on to the consumer, and then also this ripples out. So you're going to have additional, let's say, medical costs over time for people getting sick, and the companies that were feeding you the plastic in the first place aren't paying for that, right? So what they get to do is they get to save a little bit of money by not buying like the stainless steel or aluminum cups up front, and then just figuring out a circular system in house to reuse and wash and stuff. So it saves them a little bit of money up front, and allows them to offer a cheaper product. But then everything ends up costing more in the end. I mean, you're kind of watching it happen right now with insurance companies,
Mm-hmm.
and watching climate change. I mean, tornadoes are just devastating, Tornadoes, hurricanes, hot streaks, cold streaks, all this stuff is devastating. It's
Yeah.
causing so much money, and plastic's no
There,
different.
yeah, there's another winter wildfire in Colorado happening right now, I just read, which I couldn't even imagine.
Well, it's like you just mentioned about plastics, like with global warming too. And I know this episode we're not talking about that today, but we're here. So these aren't
Hmm.
warnings. This isn't the '90s. This isn't an inconvenient truth with Al Gore. I mean, it, you know, he and everyone that came before him were spot on, and we're here. Like we're in the midst of it. There is no it's not going to get better.
Yeah.
So, the anyway, and this is a problem. So, what can we do about it, right? And, you're
Yeah.
talking about to plastics. So, what do you want to dive into first around plastics?
Yeah, well, I mean, people really want to know what they can do, right? What little shifts, what little changes can you do in your own home, in your own lives to that make a difference? And some of the things that tend to come up in conversations that I've had with friends and family members are compostables. Nobody really understands compostable plastic, what to do with it, how it's compostable, what it's made out of, where it goes. And it's just kind of this like, oh, I'm gonna put a label on something and make you feel better without giving any context for what's happening with the product. And it just perpetuates complacency, really is the my issue with it. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about compostable plastics.
All right. Well, um, for me, they are generally worse than an easily recycle. Well, if you're going to compare them with other plastics, they are
Mm-hmm.
generally worse than other plastics. The way I see it, and based on the evidence, most of these compostable plastics are what are called most of the time they're PLA or a which is technically recyclable, but it has to be in its own stream. So these things have to all be separated. I don't remember if you remember when you were a kid, where
Mm-hmm.
you grew up. You guys may have not recycled, but we definitely had our bins and had to sort this. But when they moved to single stream and like a single bin situation, these things aren't getting sorted in the same way, or they're getting moved to some of these other countries, where the wages are lower to sort them. And what ends up happening is there's no market there for some of these other like number 7 plastics, number 4, 5, 6. So these things all eventually just usually get incinerated for power. So when I see a compostable plastic, first of all, if you're going to use it, not recycle it, and I just talk about recycling, composting these things, none of them are home compostable. So they all
Mm-hmm.
require a very special, they could say industrial compostable. Well, it requires 60 to 90 days inside of an industrial composting facility. And guess what? There is no industrial composting facilities that run 60 to 90 days. They just end up sorting all this stuff out and then landfilling it. So, in essence, you're just putting compostable plastics at their core for me are just putting more plastics out into the environment. Um, Generally bad.
Yeah. So I mean that brings me to a point that I feel on a daily basis that as individuals, we are completely impotent. We are unable to make very much of a difference when it comes to stopping and reversing climate change, when it comes to saving ourselves and our children. And, we've all seen the pictures by now of these, third world countries where big heaps of garbage are on fire next to little children playing. And it's a sad picture that we're all looking at. Um, but we haven't done anything. And we're being told a lot of lies from the government and PLA and this plastic material that is made out of corn or some other product, some other plant product, soy, corn, whatever, are these subsidized industrial farmed products. And we already know. So I don't know if you've heard this. This is very much all over pop culture. Sadhguru, have you heard of this? And
I have
the
not.
soil challenge. So we are about 60 years away from running out of soil that is able to sustain us. We're killing everything off. the so-called organic farming and the conventional farming methods that have been in practice for generations have destroyed the land so much that we are about 60 years away from not being able to grow anything. So this Sadhguru, he's Indian, he dresses the part, looks the part, has gotten on a bike and gotten a YouTube channel and compelled all of these celebrities to start creating these videos to talk about the issue with soil. And so it's a great message being spread. But as individuals, we don't have very much power. We have two things: voting and voting with our dollar. That's about it, right? I mean, I carry around a water bottle with me, a stainless steel water bottle with me wherever I go. I do all of these things. I'm not 100% clean in it because I'm unable to make that much of a difference. What I do know is that companies we work with, we're in the Seattle area, so they're huge companies that can actually make a difference. So let's talk about where these changes need to happen. I mean, California has already created a warning labeling system, but it's still just that warning label. I mean, cigarettes, I think were warned about since the 60s. And it wasn't until the 90s when people stopped smoking in their houses with their children inside.
Yeah. I mean, so I mean, I guess what you're asking is maybe what can the individual do, or what across all different layers can happen?
What needs to happen next? Because like I said, individuals, we have our hands tied.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of times, I mean, I feel a few things. I feel us as individuals, first of all, there's enough innovation out there and there's enough solutions out there that there really doesn't need to be a trade-off. Most of the time, if I get rid of some crappy plastic thing, I'm replaced with something that's much higher quality and that will last a lot longer. Your plastic water bottle will taste funny if it's in the sun too long, and your water gets warm. If you keep it in your bottle, it stays cold, and you can reuse it forever and ever and ever, and that saves space and landfill waste and all that stuff. So there first of all, there are things we can do by just obviously not skimping, not looking for convenience first. I don't even know, I mean, if it's that much more convenient. It's really kind of an illusion. But I mean, the first thing I think that we can do as governments or like municipalities is, and this is not about straws. it is banning. I mean, it's so obvious to ban single-use plastics. Any disposable plastic, I don't care if it's eco-based or not. It just doesn't belong anywhere. So that's where I would start. I mean, really, that makes up and same with packaging too. I mean, you should ban plastic packaging or have to pay to be able to utilize it and then ration it. But I mean, really, these things are just easily swappable in 95% of the cases, and so there's just no reason to be having anyone utilizing them. And companies can institute this stuff too, and they can lobby. I mean, they have power.
Yeah. So you're saying there needs to be policy around this, that you're saying
It
that
has
policy
to be
needs to state
policy.
that we can't have single use plastic.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's just too much special interest. There's too much dark money going the other way that it has to be on some level. I mean, if you look at what Europe has done, Europe is not living worse than us. I know. I was just in Paris a few years ago. They're doing just fine. I think honestly, they are not envious of the way we are living and the things that they have. But at the same time, Europe just they there's just less special interest money able to influence. They don't own the government the way they do here, and so yeah. But policy has to be in place. Otherwise, everyone's just hands off, and there's always going to be bad actors, and there's no way to hold them accountable.
Yeah. So, in an ideal sense, I wish that there wasn't policy that needed to be put in place. I think that going to a large government solution is a huge problem. It's kind of that stupid John Mayer song, Waiting for the World to Change. We'll be waiting for a long freaking time if we're waiting for the government to actually put policy in place that doesn't pay Joe Manchin. Like that doesn't, that doesn't put money back in their pockets, that,
Well,
it's like watching the dodos fall off the cliff to extinction. We're just like, oh yeah, let's go.
well, there's a big giant irony in this, and the irony is that, like, the Earth, honestly, I mean, we're hurting ourselves. Like, in 2-3 million years, it won't really matter. The Earth will have just turned itself over again and cleared it all out. Like, there's no
Mhm.
time. Like, we're a very finite amount of time that all of us, like, seem to live in. And so, like, yeah, we all have this belief. But here's the thing. You mentioned that, like, it's really hard. How are we going to be able to move them in time? In time, here's what's going to happen. The insurance companies are going to be like, this is outrageous. I can't keep paying for all these disasters, and it'll be too expensive. And the government, then they're going to be lobbying the government the other way. Or the health insurance companies, like, they're not going to keep paying for these procedures and these cancers and all this stuff. Or you're going to have, it will eventually work. It's just taking too long. And we shouldn't have to wait until, corporations start feeling it. I mean, I think that this is where, consumers do play a little bit of a role.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I think I don't know that it'll work. I do know that it will work itself out. I agree with you there. But what we're asking for right now, you and I, right now on this call, in this meeting, is really looking to have solutions put in place that create mutual benefit before we end up living in a situation where we have no choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? I
No.
mean, that's what we're having with warming right now, and probably plastic. So whatever's out there right now, like, I mean, I think it's 70% of all plastic ever created is still out there. Right. And so, and all we're doing, I mean, is we're just making more plastic today in the last, like, 5 years than we have in all of, like, the 50 or 60 years beforehand. So yeah, we have some serious problems. And I agree. Like, we don't have time to wait for our species to die out, to solve this problem.
Yeah, I think, some of the things that we talk about constantly. So my business, our business, the one, we mentioned, or I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, Coolperx, we are a B2B company. We have decided to actually get into um, the B2B space because companies have a bigger pull. If
Mhm.
every single one of us in my town went to Puget Sound Energy and said, hey, we're going to all go on, we all want green energy, clean energy, they could easily push that under the rug, right? However, if Google, who's building this huge complex in downtown Kirkland, goes and says, hey, this is what we're doing now, Puget Sound Energy, it would flip over pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, but again, we're talking about disclosure, right? So, and then having policy in place for disclosure. So if Google has to report, all of, let's say, their plastic usage or their carbon usage or anything all the way up and down, and that's a requirement, then we can regulate and create policy around that. And also, with the more disclosure, then you have different outside forces and inside forces too. So internally and externally within the organization, there's stakeholders at every level that this matters to. Um, but yeah, I agree. Obviously, that we work together. Is it that we have much more impact working at a corporation level and working with businesses and helping them turn the tide, because it's really what people want. Um, and then we can really make wholesale changes, as many as possible without government, interference or regulation.
Yeah. I I think when it comes to actual disclosure, though, that may be a thing that is a requirement. I know we talked about, that we joked 4 or 5 years ago that Jay Inslee needs to just put in place. No businesses larger than X can open up shop in Washington without full disclosure of their climate risk. And now the SEC is starting to require that all publicly traded companies are reporting that. However, like we know, this is something that is really incomplete. We're watching companies that have net zero goals not ask us for a single report on their scope 3 carbon emissions, which, just completely bypasses a lot of this, of the regulation, I,
Yeah.
of their
It's
own
unfortunately the
policies.
few right now, and not the many.
Yeah. And I mean, for anybody who doesn't know scope 3 carbon emissions, Seth, why don't you talk about
All right.
what they are?
So when people speak about carbon or climate data or net zero, any of these climate and greenhouse gas related terms, they're generally referring to greenhouse gases, which were agreed upon in 1996 at the Kyoto Protocol. Um, uh, and the way they break them down, and when you hear people make claims, they break them in, there's three buckets. There's scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is direct emissions. This is when you're driving your car, the exhaust coming out the back. So you were right on site, right there, and emissions are being generated. There's also like airlines and fleet cars and fleet trucks and stuff. So that's
this is
scope 1.
something that companies like Delta would focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes up the majority of Delta, for instance, is emissions, right? So this makes a lot of sense if you're Amazon, your delivery fleet. Also, buildings used to have like diesel generators. So these kinds of things. Also, natural gas usage, like on site. If you're making steel, anyway. So anything that's burning right there and emitting right there, that's scope 1. Then you have scope 2. And scope 2 is essentially, it's mostly electricity. But what it means is you are using energy and the emissions were generated elsewhere, right? So I'm using electricity here at home, but I'm not generating it here at the home. It's coming from a hydroelectric dam or something else. And so, but if it's coming from like a natural gas plant or a coal plant, which is, there's a lot more of them there than people think. And it makes up the majority of like in places in other parts of the world. Anyway, so that's scope 2. And so generally it's always been those two. And that's what every company reports. It's really easy too. They know exactly how many gallons of fuel they used. They also know how much electricity they used, and it's super easy to calculate.
Whose focus should be scope 2? Someone like Google, somebody like Facebook?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, data centers, anyone. I mean, the reality is that they should be looking at what I've heard referred to before as total carbon, because you can't just look at it. Doesn't matter whether it makes up a lot or a little of your thing. You got to look at it all. Like there's no way if you're only counting part of it, you have no concept of what's actually happening. So yeah, I mean, but all companies should focus on scope 1 and 2 because it's really easy. It's like not that hard to calculate. It just requires putting the numbers in. Those are super obvious.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about really quickly what we did?
Well, I mean, you mean how we got started and then lead into scope 3? Is that what you're?
Yeah. Well, how we even found out about scope 3.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to make more responsible business operation decisions, and we're really passionate about climate issues, and so we looked to see what climate neutral certification would look like, and we ended up getting a climate neutral certification, which is amazing, and it's from a really fantastic company out of the EU that is really well respected. The challenge is that they have us put in all of our power bills and all of our fuel bills and all of our flights and electricity bills, and so that they can and we can figure out exactly what like our what the energy mix is made up of, whether it's coal, hydroelectric, wind, solar, renewables. And so then they figured out, but then what they do for everything else, and everything else will be scope 3, and we'll talk about that in a second, is they just assign a they use an algorithm to figure out how much, like, what your revenue is, and say, okay, you could have used about this much. There's just really no good accounting around scope 3. And so, and what scope 3 is, and I said it's everything else, in our case, we really wanted to look at all the products we sell. So we're not a manufacturer, and we are a distributor, or essentially, or a retailer, you could consider us. And because of this, like, we take receipt of, we purchase products from manufacturers and then we sell them to businesses. Um, but we are, and it's not necessarily that company's fault, but no one is accountable for this stuff. So we had to look at it, and try to figure out, well, how do we look at our products? And it turns out the rest of carbon is called scope 3. And you can look at this a few different ways, but there's really two main buckets in scope 3. It's what we call upstream and downstream. So upstream is all your purchased goods and services, and where do they come from? Like, if you bought that t-shirt, how was that t-shirt grown, the cotton grown, how was it processed, how is it transported? And then downstream is end of life, like, what ended up happening to that t-shirt, right? And so, and there's carbon embodied in all of this. This is also the same thing with when you build buildings. Like, Salesforce just built a ginormous building, Google's building all kinds of buildings, like building materials, and the building of them themselves is all scope 3, and it's significant. Most businesses, scope 3 makes up 75% of their carbon. So when you're able, and a lot of big businesses do this, a lot of your net zero companies are doing this, most of them, in fact, they'll say they're net zero and they're only giving you scope 1 and 2. And in essence, on average, they're giving you about 25% of their emissions. And if we cut off all 25% today, it is not going to matter at all.
Yeah.
So that's just my personal
Yeah.
frustration
I
there.
think that part of the problem ties back to what we talked about at the beginning, where the cost of these scope 3 products is and will be pushed onto consumers who are already experiencing a huge gap in wages, in revenue, or in wealth, right? We're seeing a huge wealth gap be created during this pandemic, and we are seeing a lot of the people who are responsible for making choices that are pushing out these plastics and pushing out these items that are wasteful onto consumers, who are then having to do something about it. They're also the ones that are getting sick. They haven't generated more income during this pandemic. They're still making the same, yet their housing costs have gone up. Their utility prices have gone up. The price of trash pickup and recycling pickup's gone up. The fact that insurances aren't paying for certain medical procedures, and the cost of medical procedures, all of these things being pushed onto consumers, even further damage those relationships between businesses. They hurt people, they hurt the planet, and it's like watching the self-imploding system just keep, like, holding on to their own self-imploding system. I think that there needs to be discussion. We can start it right now about whose responsibility is scope 3. And for me, I've always said that the scope 3 responsibility is in the retailer's hands, because we're the ones directing where the consumer trends are going. But I think you brought up the point of double counting, and part of the reason why companies are like, it's not my responsibility, is because they're using the excuse of double counting.
I mean, to me, double counting is really a myth. I mean, there's so much undercounted and avoided emissions and avoided reporting and disclosure. Yeah, I agree. I think the retailer, look, like we are curating numerous brands. Like we have the most amount of pull. Like I cannot sell your product unless you disclose something or you do different business practices and my clients are large. So it puts us really in the driver's seat to be able to like impact really bigger wholesale changes. It's interesting. I think, companies, they kind of want to figure out scope three, depends on how many resources they have towards it. But because it's hard, you know, they're just kind of playing with some different things. And manufacturers don't really want to disclose this because, it's perceived as negative. But what's worse is just avoiding it altogether. So, yeah, I think retailers, we're really in a unique perspective where we can be that bridge and require and curate that kind of reporting and then deliver it to people who need it. So once we start using it, I mean, there's no way in 5 to 10 years that everything we won't know carbon the way we know calories. There's no
Yeah.
way.
So labeling is the future.
Yeah, I mean, look, there is a whether it's taxed or not, carbon has a price. So plastics have a price. All this stuff has price. So it's part of the true cost of these products that are being pushed out. And so at some point, they're gonna have people are gonna have to start paying for it, and whether it's the consumer, which is paying for it right now, in the way of like this terrible global warming and climate crisis and health bills, or whether the manufacturers decide to pay it because the government or some sort of entity is requiring it, or even a retailer like ourselves that requires it.
Yeah. So what happens when the government says, hey, you have to, as a manufacturer, you now have to pay for the carbon, pay for the climate risk that you're creating?
Well, it's not. You know what? It's not risk. It's damage, and it's already happening, right? So, what happens? Well, it's going to be a new. Well, I mean, on a practical level, it's a new sense of revenue. So that can be redistributed to help transition communities. Either, unfortunately, it's a lot of climate mitigation now, but also, or cleaning up. Or making or making investments to finish the transition, right, to clean. I mean, there's huge segments and we have the technology right now. It's cheaper, like there's it's insane. It's really insane what's happening right now. But once we start putting a price on carbon, I penned an op-ed maybe a year or two ago, I think, saying that we need a carbon tax set up in the VAT tax system, so every time that product touches someone's hands and there's dollars transferred for the product, at every level there's a carbon tax on it. And there's a few things that happen then. One is people all of a sudden are going to start looking for lower carbon solutions, and that may just be lower carbon manufacturing. Like, it's not like, instead, globalization has really made a lot of the supply chain opaque, and that's a problem. So and then essentially you're going to be driven towards lower carbon options, and then there's a lot of revenue generated which can actually help in that transition. So and help other people out that are really adversely affected, which is really everyone. But there's there are some people that are being hurt a lot more than others on this, and so it's expensive and we're going to have to pay for it, and the people that are doing the polluting are going to be need to be the ones that pick up that bill.
Yeah, I do entirely agree with you. Um, what's interesting to me is that we do have the technology and the solutions to be able to be completely green, and yet we're not.
Hmm.
And what I am told constantly is that we don't have batteries. We don't have a way to store power. So we have to use coal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit of a misnomer, right? So I it's one of those things that's like partially true or partially false, and sometimes these are the worst falsehoods for me. Um, you know, at a high level, if you think about it, okay, well the sun doesn't shine at night and it doesn't always, the wind's not always blowing. But guess what? It is most of the time that you're using most of your energy. So you can take out a huge chunk. And then, yeah, you started getting into energy storage solutions. This comes down to Bill Gates actually did a really good job, I thought, on his book, How to Avoid a Climate Crisis or Disaster. I think it was disaster. Um, he's very pragmatic. The way he looks at things, he's not very emotional about it, and I think that that's really a useful viewpoint to take a look at it. And he essentially broke it down into what he calls green premiums, and so he broke up like all the different segments that are the biggest polluters and like whatever those numbers are, and how do you reduce them? And essentially, because there are solutions essentially in every single sector. I mean, 95% of the sectors there's solutions right now.
What do
There's
you
just
mean
a
by that?
cost. Well, I mean, like, okay, so like electric cars, like we already know how to do that. They're actually
Hmm.
less expensive to operate. There's very few moving parts. Like you can get, and they're a sixth of the cost to operate, right? So
Hmm.
and you can operate completely green. So like that we already know how to do. Now, like someone's gonna have to scale up delivery fleets and like long range semis and other things. And then there are other, so we already know we can determine the cost difference. Let's just say with a personal automobile, how much does it cost for, maybe it's 10% more, 20% more for that car. So the holy grail is getting price parity or having it less expensive. And this has always been the challenge. Solar used to be just really expensive. Well, solar is now the cheapest form of energy generation. Cheapest, right? So the costs have come down that much because we invested in them. So this is but there are other segments that are hard. Aviation is just going to be incredibly difficult.
Hmm.
They're essentially going to have to develop zero carbon fuel. I mean, really, electricity is not really viable here. And then, like, if you're thinking about creating steel or concrete, concrete is just because cement. The industry makes a bigger portion that you would think, and then also like meat and stuff. So there are some other things where like climate mitigation is harder, and so it's all about. But there are zero. They figured out a way to use electricity to make steel, and it's just more expensive. So right
Hmm.
now it's all about how do you bridge those gaps, and this is where a carbon tax could go a long way to funding this innovation. You know,
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, like I've heard several times some of these narratives around not having enough jobs, that a lot of the pushback on voters and a lot of the narrative to voters, especially in very conservative districts, is that these jobs will go away, that there aren't enough jobs for Americans. And if we move to clean energy, then those jobs, then the few jobs that we do have will go away. And that's just the most absurd thing that I've ever heard, because pretty much every company that I've worked with throughout the last 4 years, and especially right now, including ours, is currently hiring and hiring for entry level jobs. But to add to that, to blue collar jobs, to these manufacturing jobs, there are a million ways in which switching to clean energy actually gives more opportunity for jobs that are less dangerous. And they're
I mean,
better on your system. You're working day jobs, you're working, I mean, even some of them night jobs, but regardless, they're available.
right. I think there's like for me, there's a really easy way I look at this. It's like what I see out there right now in what you just mentioned is people really trying to hold on to their blockbusters. And like, and Netflix already exists. And Netflix is like, hey, we want to set up shop in your community. Like, we're ready to give you all the jobs and like we're this big, we're the thing. And everyone's like, you know what? But we've worked at Blockbuster for a long time. And so everyone's just like, we're gonna stick with Blockbuster, you know. And what's gonna happen is in 5 years their sector won't exist, and they didn't take the job because they didn't invite Netflix in. There are some things that just come to be obsolete, and fossil
Mhm.
fuels are one of those things.
I don't love the analogy of Blockbuster because people are so nostalgic and
I mean, I
nostalgic
loved
for,
Blockbuster. We were there
yeah,
every Friday night,
right.
right?
But
Like,
I mean, I do I do see what you mean, and being aware that you're holding on to something that isn't functioning anymore. I mean, on a psychological basis, that's a huge, like, a huge step that people have to make, a huge leap that people have to make to trust that they're going to be safe and that they're, that this is the next step in their evolution versus staying exactly where I am, rooting down into what I'm doing and saying, no, I'm not going to change for anything and anyone, and watching these people, destroy their lives. And right now, the same exact behavior is destroying the planet and destroying our chance as humans to live a happy, healthy life in the future.
yeah, we're collectively harming each other,
Mm-hmm.
ourselves as well. And,
Yeah.
you know, and the marginalized communities are being disproportionately harmed. So it's it's a little overwhelming. Um, to be really frank.
Yeah.
Uh,
I agree with that. And disproportionately affecting our children. The fact that our daughter asks on a regular basis, is this going to exist when I'm an adult? Or is this going to be normal? These forest fires, is this going to be every summer for me? Because in the last 5 years, there have been, what, 4 summers that we can't go outside because of smoke from forest fires. And this is half of her life.
yeah, I mean, I have, for better or worse, I've spent 95% of my life here in the Seattle area. I moved here when I was really little, so it's a good 35 plus summers I've spent here, and I don't remember forest fire smoke once. And yeah, it's been, what is it, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5 the last years. It actually just follows the same temperature trends and the carbon dioxide, the atmosphere trends. I mean, this stuff is all plottable on a graph. So, but to your point, talking to our daughter, I mean, I answer her, yes. Yes, you will be dealing with this. Yes, it's going to be getting worse. I feel like it's my response. I don't like lying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think in this case this is a good lie. She should be very upset, and she should be holding us accountable, and and the industry is accountable, and they they're going to need everyone on board. And unfortunately, a lot of these changes, at least the ones, you know, um, they won't be forced on them until it gets really, really, really bad. But there's also some reasons for optimism as well. So
Yeah, I think two things I want to touch on here is David Attenborough in that last documentary he did. He at the end asked for everyone who knows to stand up and bear witness and actually say, this is what's going on. And that is what you're speaking about when you're talking to our daughter, when we're talking now. Um, but then secondly, kind of wrap up some of the things that we've talked about. And because this is a hopeful, hopeless situation. We're just in this, we're talking about what is, and now that we're talking about what is, we're giving people the power to do something, right? So voting for clean energy, voting for labeling systems, voting for these responsible business practices. One, compostable plastics. If you're at Whole Foods and you see these compostable plastics out there and you absolutely need to take a drink of water, and you don't have your own water bottle with you, throw that in the trash. You are, by putting it in the composting bin or the recycling bin, you're complicating the system. These things aren't compostable, and they're certainly not recyclable. So throw it in the trash. Um, and then I think, there are a few things that I want to touch on when it comes to companies and what companies can and should be doing, because that's a lot. We talk about that a lot. That's what we're doing. When it comes to onboarding new people, we're, Google building out this huge place out here in Kirkland, and they're most likely going to be bringing in a lot of people into the area. And my thing is always that companies need to be getting involved in urban development, in the city planning. City planning in Seattle isn't great, but Kirkland is the worst I probably have ever seen it. The putting up neighborhoods, like dead end road after dead end road, with multiple houses that are on dead end, again, dead end roads, but with really limited access to these supportive services like grocery stores and what else that make up a life. And so they contribute very much to the problem. I'm talking Google bringing people in here and not getting involved in urban development is contributing to a huge problem in traffic, in people's commutes, in increasing that distance between point A to point B, because we're trying to throw up houses in a way that isn't functional, and not laying out a design for this community in which we're going to thrive. Everything's complicated so much more because we're trying to keep up and doing it in a way that isn't built for the long haul. You talked about Paris and you talked about Europe and what Europe is doing. Their houses, their apartments are hundreds of years old. These gorgeous high ceiling, places are hundreds and hundreds of years old. But, here we can't even keep a roof without leaking for 10 years. Most people.
Well, so I don't know what your plan is for today. I'm sure that we can hop on many more calls. I just want to let you know that we're at an hour right now. This feels like this is another hour-long conversation coming if we're just going to talk about city planning and the rest. I don't actually agree with you with everything that you just said, and I think that there's probably some good stuff to discuss in there. But I wanted to. I didn't know if you wanted to wrap up this episode.
Well, I mean, make a couple of points for companies so that they have some actionable items.
Yeah, I mean,
they can do today.
It's like when we were out in Tennessee, and one of the things that we were in really rural Tennessee where we were groundbreaking, to help that solar facility that we were investing in, and what they were saying is that essentially by having clean energy available to these big companies, it's really a big recruitment tool, and that brings in jobs, and so that brings in the economy, so we can really uplift a lot of these communities. Now, we're in a really urban area, unfortunately. This is a very desirable area to live in, and so for that purpose, trying to bring in companies is not necessarily the problem, but companies do have a responsibility to help build a better place where they want to live. I mean, the fact that we don't have good public transit here, and is really unfortunate. And companies should be taking steps to do this. I think Google has actually done a really good job buying out stuff and a lot of mixed use and supporting the area. I would have to dive in deeper into their purchases and stuff. I mean, look, Kirkland, like a lot of other places, is struggling with not enough. Like, we don't have inventory, right? And so they're trying to figure that out.
Housing inventory.
Yeah, right. And my challenge is always, taking down the tree canopies and stuff. Like, you got to find another way. So the answer is no there. It's not so much that I need my big yard and stuff. I love all of that, but that's really a luxury for me. If you're going to build an urban development, like, go build that urban development, and companies that are going to help create that, and they're going to bring in that many jobs, they need to be accountable for all of the little stuff that goes out there and helping fund the community as well. They're bringing in a lot of people to use a lot of the the services that have traditionally been here, and cutting down the canopy and not putting together transportation solutions and walkability and all that kind of stuff is really not acceptable. So what can companies do? I mean, companies coming into place can demand uh, renewable energy. I mean, carbon-free energy. Really, like it's there's no reason not to be using carbon-free energy, especially as a big company. There's no sense.
Well, thank you. So we're going to wrap this up.
All right.
And next time that we have a discussion, we will talk about what you disagree with me on, and talk further about what companies can do, what individuals can do when it comes to climate change and some of the news that is coming out and some of the big things that are coming out that you may have questions about, or just interested in. If you have any questions or comments, send me a message. I will put my email in the show notes. What is that called? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Show notes. You got it.
And I look forward to chatting with you and hearing your questions or comments.